Second, we just gone through the First World War, and the U.S. was only involved in the latter year or so of that war, but we had six-figure losses. The casualties were horrendous. It was just a jolting event. And then the Russian Revolution occurred, and people felt like the world had been turned upside down in many ways. It provoked a lot of reaction. And there was a lot of changes in law at that time, some good and some not so good. You had strong anti-immigration laws. You had the rise of the KKK.
So, Dick, how did that manifest in Evanston, or with all these good laws that they created and that have been around for so long? That probably means that all the zoning laws in Evanston are perfect now, and everything is all, we settled all that back in the 1920s. We've got a good zoning code, let's just stay with it and keep moving forward.
Well, zoning always gets tweaked. You see references in the old articles to the phrase that you see it over and over again, the city beautiful. That actually came out of, I'm going to say France, but it was a first urban planning movement. So this was seen as a reform, something that would space people out. Not in the 60s.
That would give people more space, I think is what Jeff's trying to say.
Yes, but well, let me pull up here the Illinois law that cities aren't inherently allowed to zone because it is an infringement on property rights, and so there was pushback. There was pushback against that, and so this was seen as kind of a collectivist, progressive. Let's do something for the people as a whole, and it means, yes, we're going to cut back on individual property rights, but we have to cut back on the idea that anybody can do anything that they want with whatever pet.
So I can't do anything that I want in my backyard.
Well,
Maybe in my backyard, but not on the edge.
yeah, well, you can't smelt steel, or you can't, render horses into glue.
Because there are different areas of zoning. So in Evanston, for example, what kind of zones do you have?
Well, it started off with the idea, and this is what the Illinois law says, to the end that adequate light, pure air, and safety from fire and other dangers may be secured. The taxable value of land and buildings may be conserved, the congestion may be lessened and avoided, the hazards to persons and damaged property. We talk about storm and flood waters, public health, safety, comfort, morals, but the first 3 or 4 things that they talk about, number one in most zoning codes, regulating and limiting the height and bulk of buildings. And secondly, having building and setback lines. And third, regulating and limiting the intensity of the use of lot areas. This is what the state of Illinois allows cities to do. Cities can't just go and do it on their own. And so Evanston's code largely mirrored that to begin with. It's hard to find the very original code, but over at this History Center, and Central Street Neighbors were trying to put this online because it's not copyrighted. They amended it almost within the year, and they tweaked it again and again, and then they went back in 1939 and hired a consultant they hired to help them with it the first time, and said, well, let's look at it now that we've had it for 16 years, and how is it working out, and should we change it again? And there was a major rewrite around that time. There was major rewrite.
Are you trying to tell me that there were zoning controversies in Evanston?
Yes, from the,
I find that hard to believe, John. I'm shocked.
From the get-go, and the main holdup on the original zoning ordinance was over what was going to be allowed at Davis and Hinman. It was right downtown, and the pushback was primarily from the apartment building owners. Evanston fancied itself at that time that it had already adopted the nickname a city of homes. And while people who live in apartments have a home, and people who live in condos, now, which didn't really exist then, have homes, they really meant single-family homes at the time. And the word home and house don't appear very much in the ordinance. They end up using dwelling to refer to a place, and residence. But a residential district was originally, single-family homes.
And today, does Evanston still deal in dwellings? Does it deal in residences? Does it deal in does it, I'm going to use the word discriminate, but I don't mean it in that way. Does it distinguish between single-family,
Oh, heck,
multiple family,
yes.
and large-scale
And
development?
it did even at that time. It had basically one kind of district for single-family homes, another for multi-family dwellings, another for, well, there were still agricultural uses at that time. And then,
I noticed driving in today, there's an awful lot of nice community gardens.
yes,
Is that agricultural or is that park space?
there is no agricultural zoning in Evanston right now. And originally, there was really only 4 categories and then an unrestricted category. And now you can see the city of Evanston zoning map. We still have, most of Evanston is zone R, which is some type of residential. But there's an R1, an R2, an R3, an R4, might go up to 7. There's still some industrial, there's commercial. We distinguish between business and commercial. What's interesting, looking back a century ago, is that they basically considered an apartment building a business enterprise. And there was a strong bias against apartments. Partially, they didn't want to be like Chicago, but there was also this concept of tenements. It was worse on the East Coast, but again,
Hence why the fresh air.
one of the contexts is the massive immigration surge that has started. Well, it started in earnest after the revolutions in Europe in the 1840s, but really picked up speed. 1880s, 1890s. I mean, that's when you have the pictures of boatloads of boats arriving at Ellis Island, and the population of cities, which is where most immigrants from Europe landed, swelled enormously.
So back in the day, it was controversial here in Evanston to allow the building of apartments.
I don't know if it was so much, it was, yes, I suppose you could say controversial. There
A
wasn't
zoning controversy.
There wasn't a hue and crying out of it, but again, say that you bought a lot of land, and I don't mean a lot of land, I mean a lot, a specific lot, and you put up a single-family home, and now suddenly an 8-story building goes up next to you. Well, you've lost your life, you've lost your air, and there's a big difference in the quality of life between having 100 people per square mile or 100 people per acre. So the Evanston sought to nip in the bud an excessive amount of density. Population density was, and controlling population density was overtly one of the goals of zoning throughout the country.
And is that still one of Evanston's zoning goals, or does Evanston have different zoning goals now?
Well, Evanston's zoning ordinance still pays lip service to limiting mass and bulk, etc. It hasn't been as pressing because our population's been stable for a while, but that's, we've had more households, the number of households has been growing, but the size of households has been shrinking for several decades. I mean, rarely will you see the 10 or 12 person family that we had, a century ago.
So, population's more stable. The zoning laws aren't worried about giant influxes. So are there controversies now in Evanston about zoning? Can you address some of the controversies? Or?
Sure. Let me try and steer me back to this. I'll speak first in general terms, and then I'll try and get a couple of the specifics. In general terms, and this was recognized a century ago, people want to make as much money out of land as they can. Those who are in the business of making money out of land. Now, I didn't buy my house on Harrison Street to make money off it. I bought it to live it. Okay? But people do buy land to flip it or to extract rents from it. The study of extracting rents from property is one of the basis for the entire field of economics. Adam Smith talks
And
about it.
I was reading the other day about the settlement of Evanston, and many of the original settlers would buy like a 10-block plot, or a 10-parcel plot on a block, build a house, and then build 9 other houses and sell them off.
Right. And
Even if they weren't technically developers, they bought land and were developing.
Right. And things like that happened, and some of it happened innocently, and some of it happened naturally, and some of it happened for pure profit motive. And what certainly the village elders of Evanston didn't want to see was the character of the city being transformed for private profit. And it's easy to look back and judge folks, especially with a modern perspective, but they actually there was a constant drumbeat in the press against high rents, against what was perceived as the exploitation of tenants. The bias for single-family homes was not so much a snobbish thing. I read into it as they felt it to be aligned with civic engagement, liberty, personal freedom. That if you were renting, you were always going to be at the mercy of the landlord, of rent hikes. There was no rent control. There still isn't rent control. And they thought it was a good thing that people should own homes, and they wanted to stimulate and encourage that to the greatest degree possible, and they didn't want to see block after block of Chicago-style buildings, in particular, they called out areas of Rogers Park just south of the city, and they said, well, they're building them shoulder to shoulder, there's no courtyards, there's nowhere for the kids to play, you can't get sunlight.
So if I live in one part of Evanston, and you live in another part of Evanston, and I'm happy with what's going on in my neighborhood, can I complain about the zoning in your neighborhood?
You can always complain. It's the God-given right of everybody in Evanston to complain, and often exercised. When zoning is sought to be changed, if it's something very local, then people can chime in, but we're getting ahead of ourselves to some degree. In the formal processes, you're often limited by proximity, and those who are given an opportunity to testify are those who live within 500 feet, which depend on the zoning ordinance.
And we'll get more into process of zoning a little bit later.
Right, but there are instances, if you're talking about changing the entire zoning ordinance, where you're talking about, we're going to change R1, what they call a text amendment, rather than a map amendment. Map amendment says, we're just going to change one little parcel. And that's usually limited to the people who live nearby. I mean, anybody can show up at a public meeting and comment, but it's given less weight. It's not testimony. You don't have the same rights. But if you're talking about we're going to change something for every residential district in the city, or every park district, or whatever, everybody's a stakeholder and everybody gets to chime in.
And getting back to
The controversy.
perhaps some controversies in Evanston around zoning?
I mean, people were fighting about, Evanston was taken to court almost immediately after enacting this zoning ordinance. And in 1925, the Illinois Supreme Court said, no, this is a good ordinance, you can go with this. And in 1926, the United States Supreme Court held zoning ordinance in Euclid, Ohio, and you'll often hear references to Euclidean zoning, and you might think that has something to do with geometry.
I honestly did.
No. But it has to.
I legit did. I had no idea that it was from Euclid, Ohio. See, this is why you come to community meetings, to learn new things.
But Euclid had an Evanston type of ordinance, and it was upheld as well. You go back and look at the paper early, the Y wanted to build some structure on a property that didn't allow for that, so that was an early, there were people for and against that. There was a lady on Hinman who wanted to open a tea room, and they said, no, you can't do that, that'll be a commercial establishment. But they let a church open a parish house next to the church, where they could have a gymnasium, etc. And then, of course, there was a little controversy in 1925